It's time for the podcast. Yeah, the podcast is starting.
What's a podcast?
It's all gonna be alright in the end. It's gonna be alright. And if you've got some worries, my dear little friends, please rest your busy minds, because it's finally time for stories from now and then.
Hello everybody, and welcome back to Stories from Now and Then. My name is Captain Blunderface, and I'm here in the old library again with Deprecatus, yes, and it's a really beautiful day outside. It just smells fresh here by these tall windows, which actually really blends well with the old book smell too. Yes, we could go outside together, Deprecatus, but what if you run away? We should have a cat leash. Yes, a lot of cats say they'll always come back, sometimes the next day, but I would need assurances that you 100% would come back. Okay, I want to believe you, Deprecatus, but before we make a call on that, we have a shout out. So today's episode is dedicated to Adriel from Arecibo, Puerto Rico, who loves to listen to our stories before bedtime. Thanks so much for listening, Adriel. This episode is for you. Oh, and it looks like we just got a message from our sponsor. Today's episode of the show is brought to you by the official Stories from Now and Then coloring book companion. You can color along with the stories as you listen to them. To pick up your copy, head over to storiesfromnowandthen.com or check out our Instagram profile. And with that, we're thrilled to pass the mic to Nicola for today's wonderful true story. Take it away.
Okay, just before we start, I've got a little pre-story to the main story. This is also true. When I was about 12 years old, there was a speech contest at my school, and we had to decide what our topic would be. We could choose anything we wanted to talk about in our speech. And I remember my dad was telling me, you have to do your speech on Florence Nightingale. It would be amazing. And I said, Dad, I don't want to do a speech on Florence Nightingale. I don't know who that is. And nobody listening will know who it is either. So I did my speech on something different. But now, looking back, I think more speeches should be made about this lady. She was once known as the Lady of the Lamp. This is the tale of Florence Nightingale. Hey, that kind of rhymes. Once upon a time, on the 12th of May in 1820, in the beautiful city of Florence in Italy, a baby girl was born to a wealthy English family who were travelling abroad. Her parents named her Florence after the city where she was born, and her older sister was named Parthenope after the Greek name for Naples, where she had been born. The Nightingale family was very rich. They owned 2 grand estates in England, one for summer and one for winter, with servants to cook and clean, gardens to stroll in, and all the luxuries a wealthy family could want. So young Florence grew up in this world of comfort and privilege. She learned to speak French, German, and Italian. She studied music, drawing, and mathematics. She read books from her father's extensive library. She was clever and curious and thoughtful. But here's what Florence was expected to do with all that education. Nothing much at all. In the 1800s, wealthy young ladies were supposed to get married and host dinner parties, do needlework and look pretty. They certainly weren't supposed to do any serious work. Florence's mother and sister loved shopping for dresses, attending balls, gossiping with friends, and planning social events. But Florence felt differently. She felt restless like a bird in a beautiful cage, comfortable, but trapped. I must do something useful with my life, Florence thought. But what? Florence began visiting sick people in the villages near her family's estates. She brought them food and medicine. She talked with them, comforted them, helped them feel less alone. I want to be a nurse, Florence announced to her family when she was in her 20s. Her mother was horrified. Her sister was shocked. Nursing? Nursing? Dear listeners, you must understand, in those days, nursing was not considered a respectable profession. Hospitals were dirty, crowded, terrible places where poor people went to die. They didn't really know how to care for patients properly. "Florence, you cannot be serious," her mother said. "What will people think? You must marry a nice gentleman and settle down." But Florence was serious. Very serious. She didn't want to host tea parties for the rest of her life. She wanted to care for sick people, to make hospitals better, to do something meaningful. Florence's family tried to change her mind. For years, Florence argued and insisted and refused to give up her dream. Finally, when Florence was 30 years old, her father gave her permission and an allowance of money to pursue nursing training. Florence travelled to Germany to study. She learned about hygiene, about patient care, about how hospitals should be organised. She took notes on everything, observing, learning, preparing herself. In 1853, Florence became the superintendent of a small hospital for sick women in London. She was 33 years old and finally doing what she felt called to do. Florence reorganised the hospital completely. She made it clean. She improved the food. She trained the nurses. She installed a system of bells so patients could call for help. She made the hospital efficient, caring, and professional. People began to notice this remarkable woman who was changing how hospitals worked. Then, in 1854, something happened that would make Florence famous around the world. Britain went to war in a place called Crimea, in what is now Ukraine, fighting alongside France and Turkey against Russia. British soldiers were dying not just from wounds in battle, but from infections, diseases, and terrible conditions in the military hospitals. A newspaper reporter named William Russell wrote shocking articles about how badly wounded soldiers were being treated. The hospitals were filthy, disorganised, and deadly. More soldiers were dying from disease in hospitals than from injuries in battle. The British people were outraged. Something had to be done. At the British government's request, in October 1854, Florence sailed to Scutari with 38 nurses she had trained. When they arrived at the hospital, Florence was horrified by what she found. The hospital was catastrophically bad. There were no clean bandages. The beds were crawling with lice and fleas. The floors were covered in filth. There was no proper ventilation, so the air was awful. Rats scurried everywhere. The water supply was contaminated. Wounded soldiers lay on the floor, waiting days for treatment. The army doctors didn't want Florence's help at first. They were proud men who didn't think a woman could tell them what to do. But Florence was diplomatic and clever. She and her nurses quietly started cleaning, organising, and caring for the patients. When supplies ran out, Florence used her own money to buy whatever was needed: shirts, soap, towels, food, medicine. Slowly, the doctors began to see that Florence knew what she was doing. Slowly, they began to listen to her suggestions. Florence worked tirelessly. She reorganized everything: the kitchens, the laundry, the supplies, the schedules. She made sure patients had clean water, healthy food, and fresh bedding. She improved ventilation so the air could circulate. Most famously, Florence walked through the hospital wards every night, carrying a lamp to check on the patients. Soldiers would see her lamp glowing in the darkness and feel comforted, knowing someone cared about them. They began calling her the Lady with the Lamp. Florence would stop at each bed, speaking kindly to wounded soldiers, adjusting their pillows, writing letters home for those who couldn't write themselves, holding their hands when they felt sad. The soldiers loved her. And Florence's reforms worked. She saved thousands of lives by giving that hospital, and other military hospitals, a big makeover. Florence returned to England in 1856 as a national hero. Queen Victoria herself wanted to meet this remarkable woman. But Florence used her fame and influence to change medicine permanently. She was brilliant with numbers, and so she wrote reports filled with statistics and charts, proving that cleanliness, proper ventilation, nutritious food, and good organisation saves lives. She established the first professional nursing school, the Nightingale Training School at St Thomas's Hospital in London. This school trained nurses properly, teaching them hygiene, patient care, medical knowledge, and professional behaviour. And those nurses spread around the world, taking Florence's ideas about proper nursing and hospital care to every continent. They transformed nursing into a respected, skilled profession. Florence also wrote books about nursing, about hospital design, about public health. Her book, Notes on Nursing, became a standard text that nurses studied for generations. But here's something surprising. After returning from Crimea, Florence rarely left her home. She was often sick, sometimes bedridden, yet she continued working from her bedroom. And Florence lived to be 90 years old. She had spent her long life revolutionizing healthcare, establishing professional nursing, and saving countless lives through her insistence on cleanliness, proper care, and treating patients with dignity. Today, nurses around the world celebrate Florence Nightingale's birthday on the 12th of May as International Nurses' Day. The Nightingale Pledge, taken by many new nurses, honours her memory. Hospitals and nursing schools bear her name. Every nurse who washes their hands before treating a patient, every hospital built with proper ventilation, every patient treated with dignity and professional care, these are Florence's legacy, continuing more than 100 years later. Have you ever been sick and had someone look after you? Maybe a nurse or a doctor, maybe your mummy or your daddy. Think about how that feels, to be cared for like that. I think the story of Florence Nightingale shows us that caring for others who are sick or hurt or struggling is one of the most important things that a person can do. Let's all be thankful that there are people like that in the world, and let's try and be like that ourselves.
Thank you so much, Nicola, for that incredible, true, and really inspiring story. And Deprecatus, I'm thinking it would be good for you to get outside. But we should start small, though. I think we'll stay behind the old library for now, and I have this old collar and leash we can use. I do trust you, but I just want to make sure. Great, then it's settled. Some fresh air is going to do us some good. Remember, if you're listening and you'd like a shout out, feel free to send us a message on Instagram, and we'd love to hear a little bit about you, and we can even dedicate a future episode to you or someone you love. Stories from Now and Then is narrated by Nicola Ward, music by Captain Blunderface, and please make sure to subscribe to the show wherever you find your podcasts so that you never miss an episode. Thanks again for tuning in, and we'll see you all next time on
Stories from Now and Then.